IVM.
Hey guys, welcome to Marbles Lost and Found. I am Zain.
And I'm Avanti.
And today we're going to do a 101 episode on journaling. Basically just kind of talking about how it may be cathartic for the both of us. Avanti and I are going to talk a little bit about it for maybe the first segment of the show. And in the second segment of the show, we have a guest who will be on board with us. He's not here yet, but he will be. His name is Bhrigu Sahni. He's a very talented singer-songwriter, guitarist from Pune, and he'll be talking to us about how journaling works for him in his life. So for a start, Avanti, you know what? Let me just ask you, because I know that we have slightly different opinions.
You
okay,
first.
Fine. You ask me.
Yeah.
You ask me.
What the hell do you gain from journaling? And when did you start doing it? Because, and I ask because up until I was about 22 years old, I used to write a diary every day. And it was a proper Dear Diary kind of thing. And I look back and I read my diary now and I was like, I just used to write facts. I woke up at 7:13 a.m. Then I did this, then I did that. And then as I got older, the whole of my diary experience became about all my heartbreaks that I had. And it was just about love and relationships and crushes and that kind of thing. And then I just stopped writing in my diary. And I started using people as my diaries a little bit. I used to start talking to my friends about everything that's going on and that kind of helped me process stuff. So I don't know, I stopped writing. But what about you? And sorry, and also just something I really want to talk about, and I'm putting this out there because I often forget, is I've started introducing cognitive journaling into my clients' lives.
I don't even know what that is.
I'm going to get into that, but it's helped them tremendously.
Okay.
And I think, so I'm seeing the power of like a structured journaling approach. But how do you do it?
Well, firstly, before I even get into that, I want to know what cognitive journaling even is.
Real quick, it's based on cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
Okay.
And it is, the basis of it is that if you can question or challenge your thoughts that come up, that'll automatically have an effect on your emotions that you feel, and that'll immediately change your behavior.
Right.
So there's something called an ABCD approach.
Okay.
So A is the trigger. So the situation that arises, right? That's the A.
Cool.
Your B is the belief and the thought. Your C is the consequence, which is emotional and behavioral consequence, and your D is your disputation. So someone called me fat, right?
Right.
I started feeling really shitty about myself. I started feeling ashamed about my body. I started feeling guilty that I'm not eating correctly. I'm not taking care of myself. Because the thought, when I take a moment to step back, the thought behind it was, I'm not worthy unless I'm thin. Everyone thinks that I'm attractive only when I'm thin, for example.
Right.
And then we do the active disputing that thought process and coming up with like a much more realistic thought and questioning your belief system behind it. And a very cognitive approach. And when I get clients to do it in like a written format for themselves, it becomes a practice for them. And they start practicing that disputation in their head very actively.
Right.
So I've seen that work. But
sure,
that's where I'm at with journaling.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think I'm glad that I asked you to explain to me what it meant, because I feel that I do that and it came to me quite organically as I went along. But really, before I get into that, to backtrack with journaling. So for me, I never really shared with anyone when I was growing up. It was just the guy thing to do, right? And I just kind of stuck to myself for most of the time, because I think even people I'd considered close friends of mine from, my teen years up until, say, my early to mid 20s, I didn't realize what I was missing out on until I got to a point where I hit such a heavy emotional space for myself. I was going through a really bad breakup at the time, and I was anyway. I had a lot of depressive behaviors at that point in time, which kind of led me to go to therapy in the first place. And it was through that I actually started to open up to people whom I'd known for over 10 years. And it was only at that time that I realized, oh my God, there's so much more depth to friendship than I had thought earlier. And this may seem obvious to people like us now. Back then I was like, wow, can people actually talk about these things? Like, their feelings. I know this sounds so cheesy, but can people talk about their feelings to such a degree? Because I know I tried. For the life of me, I know I tried earlier, but it just felt that I was just being like, what the f*** is wrong with you? You know, I was saying that to myself, and I felt that people were saying that to me. But when I started, one of the things that helped me, apart from the fact of me talking to people, is me starting to write. And the writing for me became a very organic, natural outlet for me. It was suggested to me by my therapist at the time, you know, just write stuff down. And I've never really kept a journal or a diary or anything like that growing up. But I just started writing words. The only way I can describe how I approached it was I sat down, blank sheet of paper, I just had my pen, and I just started writing. Stream of consciousness, random words that just sort of came to my head initially, and then they just started to form cohesive sentences. And this is one thing that I've noticed about journaling, for me personally, is that I very naturally oscillate between first person and second person as I'm writing. What I've noticed as a common pattern when I am journaling is that when I'm writing in my first person, that's the very self-deprecating part of my personality that is saying, why can't this be like that? Or why can't I do this? Or
I'm such a shithead.
I'm such a shit or whatever. And then when I switch to the second person, and it's not as if I consciously decide, it just happens that way. The second person is just going, it's cool, man. Like that's his narrative. Like, it's cool. It's okay. You're doing what you need to do. You're getting better. It's all right.
You're disputing the thought.
I'm disputing the thought. Yeah. And for me, that's where my catharsis actually began, because there was all this pent up, difficult energy for me to deal with. And I was spewing all of this out. And for the life of me, I don't know where this second person narrative was coming from. It came from somewhere. And it was that made me just kind of go, okay, maybe I'm not so much of a little shit. But for me, it was also like a purge at the same time. Like there was all this stuff that just was out on paper, and it's all done now. Like it's out. But I had to make this like a daily thing for a while. I don't do it daily anymore, though.
Did you find that hard to like get into that discipline?
I don't think so. I think just on account of me being me, I suppose, I kind of felt it necessary. Like I didn't feel like, oh my God, this is such a chore. I was doing it because I wanted to, because I knew how much better I felt whenever I did do it. Because 2016 generally as a year was a very hard one for me. And I knew that when I woke up in the morning, I felt a certain way. So I was like, you know what? I have to get to that piece of paper and I have to freaking write, because I have to get this shit off my chest. And it was an ongoing thing, you know, like I got some stuff off one day, some more shit came on through that day from wherever, and then I continue writing again. And so, but there were points as well where, you know, it wasn't just about the words anymore. It was more about the intent behind what I was writing. And the only way I can describe that is I'm writing whatever it is I'm writing. And then the things that, whatever the subject matter is, might become a little bit more intense over time. And I can feel my writing get a little bit more jagged and stuff like that. And then there comes a point where I'm like, almost like I've broken the tops of pencils because I'm writing so intensely. And there comes a point if I'm using a pen, though, I just cut through the paper because there's so much just going on. And I'm just like, oh shit, maybe there's a more eco-friendly way to do this than just like ripping through all the paper that I have.
But that ripping through is your way of sort of communicating something that needed to be communicated.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So the thing is that now I went a step further, so based off one of my more recent sessions with my therapist was, she said, you know, you can continue to write. She also gave me an idea of what stuff I should write about, which is basically, you know, all the stuff that you want to say to whomever you feel has quote unquote wronged you and stuff like that. Or whatever you feel is wrong with you, this, that, and the other. Again, quote unquote, whatever you feel is wrong with you. To use her abbreviations, right? You can write down whatever you want and just like to get it out. And she's like, well, and if you feel like you don't want to write, you can speak into your phone as a voice note. So that's what I started to do, is that my form of journaling now is to make voice notes on my phone. And the way I usually do it at night, because I feel like that's the most private point of my day. And it's intense because there were thoughts that came about that I frankly would never even tell anyone that I felt. Like because they're just so intense and they're so dark almost. And in fact, I'll be honest, there was a part of me that was ashamed for the fact that I actually had thoughts like that. I'm like, what is wrong with me that these thoughts are there? But she was like, that doesn't matter. Those are just thoughts. get them out. It doesn't mean that you are a bad person. It doesn't mean that whatever you're thinking is going to happen or whatever. Get it out. So I would, at first, like when I started doing it on my phone, I was like, this is a bit silly or whatever. But then as I got into it and I felt whatever I was feeling, like the intensity of what negative emotion I might have had at that time. And a lot of it is a pain in my chest. Usually I have this clenching feeling in my chest almost all the time. And as I started to talk about stuff, and the point where I felt like, if I was writing, I was scratching into the paper, I kind of felt the way my voice changed as well. It became a lot harsher. It became a lot angrier. My body language changed. I was hunched over and I just was like, I was so tense. My muscles were tense. And I got all this shit out. But after I got all that shit out, it was just suddenly like, and then suddenly it was just, the only way I can put it is like, let's say you've had a heavy night of drinking. And you've drank too much because everyone's asking if you're okay and you're going, I'm fine. But the vomit's going to happen at some point or the other. You're going to throw up, but you're just like, no, I can handle it. I'm fine. I can handle it. I'm fine. And then eventually you're like, okay. And as soon as you do that, yes, it feels intense. You're sweating, whatever, you're tired, you're crying. I'm so sorry, guys. You're doing all of that. But as soon as it's done, you're just kind of like, yeah, I needed that. Now I can go to bed.
Well, that's. Sorry, just to interrupt,
no,
but I think that's really interesting because I think about what you're describing as catharsis, or writing or speaking as catharsis.
Absolutely.
But where I always what I always wonder is, okay, there's catharsis, but then there's change, and often there's a gap between catharsis and change, and catharsis does not lead to change. So, for example, you'll vomit all that out, but you'll continue drinking in 3 days, you'll get straight back into where you're at and you need to vomit again.
Sure.
So how do we create a model of feedback in journaling where you're allowed to sort of question what's going on? It's not just like, I feel like shit. Okay, and so what? What next?
That's a good question. And I think that'll also very well segue into our next half when we talk to Bhrigu, because I know that he has a slightly different use for journaling as well. But just my own 2 pence as far as this is concerned is fine. I spent a lot of my time going, I suck, or this or that. This is shit. That is shit. But then again, through the course of therapy, through the course of them and this isn't shit that happened overnight, this was me over time trying to figure out what worked for me and what didn't. And then and you know how I said I oscillate between first person and second person. The second person narrative is the one that kind of helps me see things slightly differently. That's where my paradigm shift at least happens, right? Like, okay, fine, this is shit, that is shit. It's cool.
Yeah.
Think of it like this. Think of it like that. And that voice came from within, which is the most important thing, but also perspective that I've received from therapy, from close friends as well. So that's where my shift sort of began. It really came from communicating more than anything. And then I started to integrate those new perspectives into how I behave. Sort of, I think it's fairly similar to CBT, as you mentioned, or cognitive.
Yeah, it sounds like a stream of consciousness version of ABCD model.
Pretty much. Honestly, it is, because for me, that's where my own sort of improvement sort of began, starting to philosophize about my own beliefs. I believe as a way to end our first segment, I would say that, in one of my therapy sessions most recently, my therapist tried to help me get to the bottom of what my deepest core fear is, or core insecurity is. And it had to be a very concise, simple sentence. And the sentence that I ended up coming up with her help was, my freedom is chained by fear of rejection and failure. So every single action or inaction I've taken in my life has been based off of that sentence in some way or the other. So to then find myself writing or speaking into my phone, trying to understand what failure means to me, what happens to me when I actually experience failure, but then looking at it another way, and then looking at what I can do even though I have quote unquote failed, is a very ongoing process, honestly. It's not as if a penny will drop one day. Tiny epiphanies here and there do happen, but I've been working on myself, I suppose, for the last 3 years, and I have a fair amount to go anyway. But
your whole life.
Just like my whole life.
We are always a work in progress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good way to cut into the first segment, and we'll lead a little bit more into what more we can do with journaling into the next section with Bhrigu. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you are not following us on social media, please make sure you do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I have been asking you guys to do this. I think some of you are, but some of you aren't. Have you told your best friend about your favorite podcast? Please make sure you do that as well. You are our ambassadors. If you don't go out and evangelize on our behalf, who's going to do it? So please go out and tell somebody about the podcast you're listening to. If you think there's somebody who would enjoy it, refer them to IVM Podcast and tell them about all the stuff that they can find on our app or on our website or, Spotify, Savan, everywhere you're listening to podcasts, right? Just give it a shot. Also, guys, I'm going to be at Podcast Movement the coming week from the 13th to 16th of August. Podcast Movement is a conference in Orlando where we're going to be doing all kinds of podcasty stuff. So check it out. If you're in the area, please do come by and say hi. If you're not in the area, you can follow along with me by following, my social media in this case is Doshi Amit on most things. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by renowned filmmaker, writer, and producer Anis Bazmi. He talks about his work as a child artist, the changing canvas of Bollywood, the role of the screenwriter in it, his slate of blockbusters with Salman Khan in the late 2000s. I really think this was a fun conversation. Anis is a really fun guy to listen to. On 9XM Soundcast, Eva Bhatt is joined by popular Punjabi singer Milind Gaba. They talk about his strong belief in spirituality and how his love for melody changed his destiny. On Ganatantra, Alok and Saryu discuss the abrogation of Article 370 and its implication on the future of Indian federalism. On the Pragati podcast, Pawan talks to Dr. Mandira Kala and Shamphavi Nayak about the pros and cons of the DNA technology regulation bill. On Marbles Lost and Found, Zain and Avanti talk to musical artist Bhrigu Sahni about learning to express yourself through journaling. On States of Anarchy, peace educator Chintan Modi joins Hamsini Hariharan to discuss what peace between India and Pakistan could look like. On Keeping It Queer, Naveen and Farhad talk about emergence of TikTok comedy and how it allows gender bending. On our Kannada podcast, Thalle Harate, Dr. Harini Nagendra joins Surya and Pawan to talk about trees, their connection with cities, and their history in Bangalore. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
And we're back, and we have Bhrigu on air with us.
Hi, Bhrigu.
Hey, guys.
How you doing? Thanks for being on board with us.
I see you've brought your journals.
Yes, I have.
Amazing. So, you know what? Let's try and now essentially channel the things that I was asking myself, Avanti was asking me in the first half to you. So I remember when we spoke earlier, just as a bit of background, you don't primarily use journaling as like a catharsis, but you use it for a bit more than that. So what is that bit more?
So it's a bit of both, actually. The first part of journaling for me is definitely cathartic, and it's sort of, when you sit down and you have like thoughts or like situations, like Avanti said, sort of have in your head or in your life, and you don't know what to make of it, and it's sort of a tough situation that you're going through, and maybe a lot of things are up in the air, and you're a little stressed out about it, or you can't find your bearings, so to speak. Then you sort of sit down, and when you're like just sitting and thinking by yourself, you're in the driver's seat, or you don't get perspective on a particular situation, and that's why things can sort overwhelm you, exactly, and you can't find answers,
or
and
meaning.
Then, exactly,
Yes,
both.
That's what it's about, meaning making.
And then when you sort of sit down and write about each and every episode or thing that is sort of troubling you, then that second perspective comes into place, that what you were talking about, Zain, which is like, you're first person, and then you're a second person that is saying that, yo, it's cool, what you're doing is right, and this is, look at it from that perspective, and okay, cool, tasalli mil jati hai, that kind of vibe. And so that is this sort of
Hang on, did you understand what that meant?
Tasalli means you feel
Comfort.
Satisfied. You feel like
right.
contentment sort of.
Okay, cool.
Sorry about that. Anyway,
no, that's fine.
No, I love that.
You speak the way you want to speak, bro.
Right. Then in that case, no. So you get a little clarity on things. You get a little perspective on things when you're sort of like, you write things down and you see situations from afar, as opposed to like immediately judging them or immediately judging yourself on how you acted on them or stuff like that.
Right.
So you kind of detach from the situation a little bit, and then you have different perspectives of not only your current self that is in the driver's seat, but your wisdom, your inherent wisdom that takes a second to talk.
Right.
It's not that
knee-jerk reaction. Yeah.
Knee-jerk reaction. It's like, "Arey, you're idiot, that kind of, you're fat." All of that is very like right there, damn, bam, 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 But once that kind of silences, there's a lot of wisdom in each and every one of us, that sort of doesn't see the light of day. Unfortunately, I mean, it does, but it's sort of drowned out by all of this chatter, So when you sit down and write, you really see deeper perspectives on it, and it's actually beautiful, because I feel like in this journaling thing, okay, so what is journaling? For me, at least, it is the act of writing down thoughts, events, circumstances, tricking times in your life, things when you're unsure of yourself or of what is going to come or what happened or how you reacted, or basically like that. And you sort of write down this event in 1 or 2 or 3 pages, and by the end of
or
it,
10
or 10 or 15, whatever, man, just little short stories I'm about to publish a little now. So you write down, like, let's say 3 pages, and in that is journaling, right? And before I came here, I was sort of reading through my entries, and I sort of saw a flow in it, in which the first sort of para is like an introduction, just being like, hey, I haven't written in this for a while. What's happening? Yo, you cool? That kind of vibe. And then you start writing, right? You make the connection and then you go in. And then the second, third para is addressing what is disturbing you, right? You write about that and whatever that is, right? You write, say somebody said this, or my father said this to me, and today I feel really bad, but I don't know what to do, but I want to solve it, and how can I solve it? And then you get sort of another perspective on it that comes in the next few paragraphs that are leaning towards it. And then by the end of it, you kind of come out of the whole thing with a little light, with a little more light shining through it. And then you walk out of this episode sort of feeling tight. You feel like, okay, kuch to tasalli mil gayi, that kind of vibe.
Right. So is there, like, for example, is there a particular journal entry that perhaps that you had that?
Yeah, I was I get you. I was thinking, I was actually trying to find, but they're all like really not crazy, but they're so there's another one. So you said there are 2 aspects, at least. I mean, I have 2 aspects to this journaling sort of entry thing. One is this catharsis, which I'll try to find maybe later. And the other one is just simply the act of writing, which maybe comes close to Dear Diary, which is where you're writing and you're just thinking of an idea. So this is not catharsis at all. This is just, you're thinking of an idea and you're writing it out, and you're like, wow. And then it builds into something, and it is still journaling because you relate it to your personal life and how you can use it. And I'd like to read one of those.
Sure.
If that's cool.
Yeah, please go for it.
Are you going to sing it?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so I have a lot of things in here. One is like back in New York. One is like back in India. One is like, shit, what am I going to do? My album, that kind of stuff. So this one is...
I love how you oscillate between different languages as well when you write.
Oh, thanks.
I know, I just noticed that.
Yeah. Zain's like peeking into Bhrigu's journal.
Yeah, go for it. It's all good.
No, I didn't mean that.
That's okay.
I was actually just kind of like, I just wanted to look at your handwriting more than like the
Yeah,
words.
it's all squiggly and it's like,
cool. Okay, I'm not reading it, I promise.
No, it's cool. I mean, I'm going to read this aloud, so you can read it, man. It's cool. All right, so this is called Nature/Worship. Okay, so, and this is like super casual. All right, so this is how it goes. Oh, holy shit. I just saw a snake in my garden. ! So beautiful. From far away, of course. Nature is way too crazy to handle. What the hell is going on? How did these guys happen? And to think of the universe, the moon, oof, it's impossible. And we carry on with our lives, of course. What else is there to do? We can't stand in awe forever now. So we try to study it, decipher it, which leads to more mystery, more confusion. We could worship it. Does that make us smarter or duller? To worship, so this is like just thoughts, right? Yeah. To worship that which one doesn't understand, cannot possibly be comprehended, is often completely shunned, deleted, or deified/worshipped. For once you understand something, anything, it loses its reverence. So once you understand something, it sort of loses its reverence. Why? Simply because it is understood. For when something makes sense, it loses that quality. that attraction of overbearingness, of beauty, of depth, of something that transcends one's own subjective reality. So perhaps it is best for some things to be left unlearned, for it'll continue to emanate beauty and awe. It'll continue to be preserved in some sense. Now, it would make sense to apply this thought or notion to my musical career, to retain an element of mystery of how does he do that. For once people understand, or if it is replicated in some way, it'll lose its value, or it shall lose its value. This mystery element seems to be gained only through rigorous practice, which has been the tried and tested method. See Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, Bhimsen Joshi, Leonard Cohen, Tommy Emmanuel, etc. I have come a certain length, this is for certain, but perhaps this mix of guitar, voice, and lyrics can be far more potent than any of them by themselves. Or perhaps not. Only time will tell.
That was amazing,
I loved
actually.
that.
I love that.
Oh,
I got like sucked into that.
Yeah, so was I.
That's
Maybe we should have like a segment where it's just like Bhrigu like narrating like bits of his job.
I love how all the phones are like all phones on Bhrigu right now.
That was
No, but
really
seriously,
beautiful.
That
Thank
was
you.
really beautiful, man.
But the point is that, like, you see a snake in the garden or some shit,
Yeah.
or you see anything,
And it inspires you.
and then you start writing.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you can go lost in thought, but it'll only take you so far until the next thing happens. You know?
Right.
But if you write it down and trace it, you can actually go somewhere deep and then maybe flip it and use it for yourself. you
Yeah.
know?
And something as
So-
simple as just seeing an animal in your garden.
And what happens after that, Zen, is that once you've written this, you walk out in a state of inspiration.
Right.
And since this is about mental wellness, right? You're using journaling to sort of go whoop, and that curve is going down and up.
Right.
So you walk out after an entry of this sort of beaming,
Right.
as opposed to being going
And
downhill.
actually, that's really interesting because we focus so much on mental distress and how we use journaling for distress and figuring out distress.
Yeah.
But what if we were able to do exactly this? Like take a moment that's like a tiny little bit beautiful. There's some element of beauty in it.
Absolutely. Very poignant.
And kind of deepen that in our writing.
amplify that. Yeah,
and
for sure.
leave with a sense of beamingness, like you
Yeah,
said.
that's
I'm
beautiful.
gonna use that with my clients.
Oh, do it!
Amazing.
Amazing.
10%.
It's like, you know what,
10%.
f- the distress in your journal right now.
You know, it's funny that you say this because, like I said, for the most part, I've used my journaling primarily as a sense of catharsis. I think the ratio is probably 10 to 1, perhaps, or maybe like 9 to 1, where I've actually had a journal entry which has just been, for lack of a better way to put it, a form of embracing, a form of really like being present with what is going on and how much I appreciate that. I've actually, to put it very blankly, I don't think I've had many journal entries that are based off, say, gratitude, for example, and then really appreciating what's going on. And that there's actually not, when I think about it, I know immediately that there's something to be said for that, because you really feel that gratitude a lot more intensely because you're creating an imagery now with whatever it is. Because for example, I was sucked, just like Avanti, I was sucked into that story,
Right,
for
right.
sure.
Awesome.
So, I really think that's a very beautiful
I've
approach.
started doing it in my sessions with my clients too, because I think there's too much focus on what's not going right. And I've started bringing in that element of, you know what, tell me what's going right for you. And let's like get into that a little bit. Let's get excited about that.
Fill the mind space with that.
Yeah.
As
a
opposed to the
little
other
bit.
stuff.
Yeah.
For sure. A lot, man.
I feel like it's like some strange, shitty form of survival instinct where, like, you know what, call it that, where we tend to really remember the traumatic, not so great things, and that just kind of overshadows the good things.
That's so true.
Yeah.
So
So
dismiss the good stuff.
It's like my mom would tell me that actually. She was like, just like thinking, pondering one day, and she's like, it's crazy, Jab, like when something like really beautiful or good happens to us, like when like you win something or some beautiful thing has happened, you celebrate it, but then you forget about it immediately. Maybe because it's in the nature of the mind to like sort of what's next, You know what I'm
Right,
saying?
yeah.
But when something bad happens to you, you're just like, fuck, you know, collapse, destroyed.
Yeah,
You know, decades can go by and like you're still on that same shit.
Yeah.
You know, so like we
Yeah.
don't celebrate the good things like
Enough.
Sure,
really,
exactly.
For long enough.
Like
Yeah.
even something,
So-
I don't mean to generalize, but say something as simple as, you know, some people might not be able to take a compliment too well. They'll be like, yeah, okay, fine. I think that you are this, and they say, at best they go, I know Avanti's laughing.
You just did that to me. That's why.
I mean, it wasn't pointed at you, but the thing is that I feel like I've gone and put my foot in it.
Oh, no, not. I don't feel.
put it,
no.
it's all cool, man.
But you know, you sometimes will you may be paid a compliment, and at best you go, all right, thank you, and then you just brush it off. Or sometimes you'll be awkward, you'll be like, thank you, which is what you did.
Yeah.
But
And I was like, no, I want to analyze that. Like, what do you mean by that?
But then if someone pays you, if someone says something to you that you may deem as unkind, or you'll be like, wait, why did they say
Exactly,
that?
and then you just keep thinking about it and then
Is
spiral
there
down.
is there some truth to what was
No,
said? Like, wait,
no.
what? And so we give that so much more importance than we do the good stuff, you know?
no,
It's a very
very
strange
Very
way
true.
that we function as people.
Yeah, it's silly. You should just figure it out. Yeah, I've been also thinking, maybe it's a little off topic, but yeah, we just don't know much about ourselves, you know? Like, our thoughts, why does this happen? Why does that happen? Breath, like, just no idea. No idea, you know? No, seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And like dreams, like for example, like
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend last night about dreams and he's like, yo, you know, Native Americans really were like into dreaming and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, it's a sign, you know? And we don't know much. It's like all esoteric or, you know, some half-assed knowledge, you know, as opposed to like some concrete thing about how we work, how our body and mind and everything functions.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think this is a very good point for us to end the episode today. Bhrigu, thank you so much, man.
Of course.
Especially
Thank
for sharing that
you.
journal entry. That was
Yeah.
amazing.
Anytime. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. This is Marble Lost and Found. I'm Zain.
And I'm Avanti.
See you guys next time.
Hi, I'm Anupam Gupta, B50 on Twitter, and listen into the Equity Sahiya podcast brought to you by Motilal Oswal Asset Management Company. The Equity Sahiya podcast offers deep investment insights into the potential of many sectors in India which are growing and have a lot to offer for your portfolio. New episodes out every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast app or any other app where you get your podcasts from.
Filter coffee is a fascinating beverage. You need to pick the right beans, blend them in the right proportion, roast them to perfection, and slow brew at the right temperature to get the perfect cup. Which is exactly like great conversations as well. You need to track down the most interesting minds, get them into their zone, and settle down for an unhurried, unscripted chat. And coffee for me is always best enjoyed with friends. I'm Karthik Nagarajan, and do share my table as I meet some of the most interesting people I know and sit them down for a strong cup of coffee and an even stronger conversation. Join me every Wednesday for a freshly brewed episode. This is not frappe. This is the Filter Coffee Podcast.